Let's get to the big question. What are you seeing the future of AI?
We probably would not trust AI as of yet.
Winnie Maignan, with more than 15 years of expertise in strategic HR planning, serving as the Vice President of Sales Compensation at McKesson.
Even the most beautifully designed sales plan, if the data is wrong, the outcome of that plan could be different than the intent.
A lot of the mid-level managers in sales comp is they're not getting a seat at the table, where decisions are made.
Be the one who's thinking about the thing that he hasn't thought about yet. Bring value, and that's how you get a seat at the table.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Uncappd. I'm Siva, founder and CEO of Everstage. Today's episode is a special one. We're sitting down in person with Winnie Maignan, VP of Sales Compensation at McKesson. Winnie has over 20 years of sales compensation experience across several large conglomerates, including GE, Morgan Stanley, Microsoft, Hilton, and now McKesson. McKesson is the 9th largest company in the United States by revenue, with nearly 50,000 employees, and at the heart of how pharmaceuticals move across the country. Running sales compensation at the scale at which Winnie has run is an entirely different discipline. The complexity of the plans, the data, the stakeholder management, the sheer volume of transactions. That's exactly what we are here to unpack today. What does it actually look like to design, operate, and evolve sales comp programs inside some of the largest companies in the world? What breaks at that scale, what works, and what's changing? Winnie isn't just a practitioner, she's also a World at Work faculty and sits on the advisory council at World at Work. She's one of the people shaping where this profession goes next. Winnie, super excited to have you on the podcast today. Let's start off with how you got into sales compensation. I'm sure you didn't study sales compensation back in your college. So, how did you get into sales comp? Did it find you, or was it a deliberate choice?
Well, it's a great question. It's an interesting question. For me, my career started in finance. Both my undergraduate degree and my graduate degree was a concentration in finance. I was an analyst, both doing sales analytics as well as financial analytics for over 10 years, building complex models, synthesizing those, and translating them for senior leaders. And the interesting thing is, during that time frame when I was an analyst and I would interview for other analytical roles, the recruiter or the interviewer would often stop me and go, "Hey, I got the perfect job for you. It's in sales." And I would think, "Oh my goodness." And then, but quite honestly, they were right. Sales compensation for me was the perfect marriage between my technical data acumen, my communication skills, but also my relationship management skills. And what I came to learn was that, sales compensation really wasn't just a pay program. It's a people strategy. We're shaping performances, motivation, trust, and fairness. And so in a lot of ways, you become like this mini chief people officer for your sales organization. So I am happy to have been found by sales compensation.
Fantastic. So when did you realize that, this function has a lot of firepower in it, and, this is a great place to invest your, next 20 years?
Yeah, I think sales compensation is one of the most critical functions of the organization. It's high stakes. It's also high rewards. But what sales compensation do is we are directly aligned to the commercial success or the commercial heart of the organization. So if you can think about the sellers being the heart of the company, what sales compensation is doing is pumping hard into that blood, right? We're doing that through strategic plan design, operational efficiencies that includes rewarding accurately and on time, effective quota setting, performance analytics.
Right.
We're that glue. And what happens is when those elements are not in alignment, the company feels it immediately.
Right.
Hence why we know that sales compensation and the function that we do in terms of motivating those sellers to behave in ways that align to our corporate strategy is highly critical. No sellers, no company.
So I wanted to ask you about, your career, and obviously you've seen several different phases of sales compensation across GE, Hilton, and of course now McKesson. For us at Everstage, we've seen obviously companies across multiple industries where the data is right, the intent's right, but sometimes, the sales comp plans don't go according to, what you envisioned. So why does this keep happening across companies?
Yeah, the sales compensation plan document it takes a lot of time and effort to strategically pull together. It's also highly instrumental in the successes of the organization and driving the right behaviors. However, the plan document or the plan itself is just one part of the larger ecosystem, right? So to minimize that gap, to optimize success, there are all these other elements that come to play. We talk about the talent, quota setting effectiveness, having a clear go-to-market strategy, and there's also external environmental factors as well. It could be the economy, what if we're in a pandemic? And so without all these elements, or those elements are not all in play correctly, the plan can fail. So even the most beautifully designed sales plan, if the data is wrong, then the outcome of that plan could be different than the intent. So that's why you see gaps. All of those elements have to be in sync, but the trick is to be nimble. You want to be able to design plans with the people in mind. You want to design plans where you've already thought about what does success look like when these plans are delivered. You want to be able to track that as closely as possible so that when there is a change that is required, you can act more quickly with the people, with the organization, and with the financials in mind. So that's how those gaps happen, but that's also how you can minimize it as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I want to double click on the point that you mentioned, which is being nimble.
Yeah.
Increasingly, we're seeing obviously macro environments are changing so quickly, and what you planned at the start of the year, is very quickly, it evolves over the year. So how do you manage to stay and keep the sales comp relevant as things move across the year?
Yeah, the theme with me is always about the customer experience, right? So even when I'm designing a plan, I'm thinking about if this doesn't land the way we anticipated, what does that mean for a change for a team member? So we're adding additional kickers. What happens next year if I have to take it away? So this is when I'm saying you have to be nimble, you have to think about the future in terms of adjustments, changes, and you want to plan accordingly. Right. So I'm always thinking about how can we adjust going forward to fit our new environment, which is always changing.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome. So what fundamentals, in your opinion, has not changed, across companies, across, the time that you've seen sales compensation evolve into? So what's not changed?
What's not changed? The customer experience, what I just mentioned. It's all about the people, right? And in sales compensation, everyone is your customer, right? The sellers are your customer. Finance, HR are your customers. The accounts are your customers. The board of directors are your customers. And so you have to design plans with the people in mind to fit the engine. And I read that through, this whole customer experience that I'm so obsessed with. And I love preaching this to the team, which is we have to be obsessed with the customer experience. But it's a Steve Jobs book from over 15 years ago where I thought it was career changing that lead with the customer experience. So regardless of the size of the organization, the sector, or the challenges that are being faced, think about each customer and how they're being impacted and how you can measure those successes as well. Yeah,
I know that. That's a great point because, in all of our, pursuit to get the right plan, you miss out on the fundamentals of why you exist as a business.
It always comes down to the people that have to coach the sellers who have to influence the sale with the customer, the pricing team. We have to think about it from every element. Sell compensation practitioners, we're in a unique advisory role where it's constantly a matrix environment, and we broker a lot of different conversations through different functions, right? Finance wants to be more cost effective. Sellers, they want the sales leadership, they want growth. HR wants fairness. And we have to find a way to bring all those pieces together and find the right porridge for our organization and our people.
Absolutely. All right. So, that gets us to the whole cross-functional, part of sales comp. As you just mentioned, it sits right across HR, finance, operations, and sales, of course. In theory, it feels like cross-functional collaboration. In reality, it's chaos.
Organized chaos.
Organized chaos. So how do you? What's been the way that you've been able to manage partnerships across all of these different functions, and how do you advise your teams to ensure that you align all of these different teams with different perspectives and different goals that each of them have? How do you align them all?
Yeah, I mentioned the ecosystem earlier, but really it's a village. It takes a village to make things happen. And so the first step is getting to know those villagers, right? What do they do and what is the role that they play in the organization and how we make money? As a sales compensation practitioner, you have to know how we make money.
Right.
And what role each team member is playing in that process. And that's literally the key to success in being able to determine the right KPIs for your plan, what's feasible in terms of operationally or not, what can be influenced as well from the seller's perspective. So the one thing I always share in terms of a matrix or cross-functional environment, get to know the people. You have to build those relationships. I try to understand how people process information. So I know which leaders prefer sales charts versus sales tables, right? I know which leaders I have to fly in for and sit next to and propose the sales plans for versus we can measure during teams. So really get to know your stakeholders and treat everyone as a customer. That's how you get in their mind in terms of how to best influence them.
Got it. Maybe if you were to take an example from your career, a time when, I'm sure this is not rare, a time when there was conflict between two functions, like finance wanted something and sales wanted something else.
Yeah.
How did you end up brokering the whole conversation and achieving what you wanted to achieve at the end of the day?
There's a couple of ways you can do that. Typically, I tend to take both parties separately first and understand what the challenges and what their I want to know what are their deal breakers and what is their North Star. And then I'm able to provide data to support or support or oppose the actual proposal. I find that anytime I get into a room and I make suggestions that is supported by data with documented pros and cons, people come together.
Right.
And it's just a matter of really acknowledging, like, hey, these are the things that we have control over, and these are the things that we don't. And some wants to save on cost, some wants to do growth, some wants to go at lightning speed, and we can't do all things at the same time. So we have to align in terms of what is our North Star.
Got it.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Awesome. So let's get to the big question, the question on AI, right? Like, obviously, we're seeing AI in some sense disrupt a lot of white collar work and functions. How do you see AI impacting sales compensation, and what are you seeing the future of AI?
Listen, there's a lot of buzz around AI. There's a lot of excitement, but I get it. It's fun, it's innovative, but sales compensation, it's complex. It's data heavy, but more importantly, it's personal. We're talking about people's mortgages. We're talking about people's tuition. We're talking about people's livelihood and stability. And so when I think about AI and as it relates to sales compensation, I think to myself, we have to be uber sensitive where we apply or try to experiment with AI. So you're right. The question really isn't about to use AI or to not use AI, but more so about when to use it and when it's not a good idea, right? And so to me, the best time to use AI is really to help remove friction. So the heavy lifting of a sales rep, right? It can help in terms of managing large data, what if scenarios, finding anomalies in your data and things of that sort, really freeing up the practitioners and the analysts to focus on more significant efforts like insights, right? Now, where we probably would not trust AI as of yet is judgment. AI does not understand nuances that has a lot to do with the complexities of sales compensation. So AI doesn't get territory changes, product, what's the word I want to use? It doesn't get the product maturity, right? It doesn't understand culture and equity. So in that sense, we would not ask AI to make judgment calls. So in short, can AI help? Yes, in terms of the heavy lifting, but do we give them the keys to the car to drive? Not quite yet, buddy. We got to hold off on that.
Yeah, no, that makes a complete sense. And at the end of the day, the biggest missing piece is context.
It's context.
And the context is everything in sales composition, as you said. The context about the company's culture, the products, the people, and their motivations. All of those are the secret sauce that help you build the plan.
Yeah.
Obviously, you could see AI getting used in a lot of the data crunching and potentially in helping with communication as well in some sense. But, you want to have the human perspective come in to actually make that judgment call.
Yeah, but it's still significant. It's still significant improvement in terms of our process, because foundationally we want to start with the data, right? We want a database approach to plan design. We want this database approach to stakeholdering. So if we can have AI support us in those efforts, and it frees us up to pull our decks together and our stories together and to really interpret what's happening with the people in the business and economy, I think that's tremendous.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think it really allows the function to be truly strategic and not worry about the tactical busy work.
Yeah.
So I think that's the biggest opportunity that we see.
And I can see how that can open a door for more technical persons in the field of sales compensation. I can tell you historically, I'm seeing the growth of data scientists in sales compensation as well. Because, when we talk about data, we need those dashboards as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And so how do you see the future of sales compensation from a profession? And also, what advice would you give somebody who's young, in this profession, who's looking to learn on how to really scale in their career of sales compensation? What's the advice would you give them?
If you have an interest in sales compensation, there's so much I can share in terms of, you have to remember we're in an advisory role. We are not legal. We are not the police. We provide strategic advisory to the organization to make decisions. But if you're looking to enter sales compensation or to thrive and excel in sales compensation, I would say you want to not just focus on your current environment or even your past environment, but really get a great understanding of the market trends, the economy, talent. And then for your organization, you really want to understand how that money works. It always comes back to, how does the company make money? How do they generate revenue? What does that selling motion look like? And that's how you go from being truly tactical to strategic. And if you're looking to enter the field, start off with a data acumen and have a strategic mindset. And that's how you get more of the big picture thinking. But from an advisory perspective, I share quite often, just don't take it personal. Don't take it personal. Bring your best foot forward with your database proposals, with your pros and cons, and let's see what happens. Have a fresh, open, interactive dialogue on what you're trying to solve for.
Got it. And one of the things I've heard from a lot of the mid-level managers in sales comp is, they're not getting a seat at the table. Where decisions are made. They end up being, obviously advisors, but sometimes they don't get the opportunity to help make the decision. Yeah. So in such cases, for folks who are stuck in the middle management layer, what advice would you give?
Bring value.
And what would value mean?
Bring value. It could be something as simple as I was on a call the other day with a senior leader, and he's like, "Hey, I am creating a JD." I said, "Whoa, tell me about the role. I have 3 JDs. I'll send that over to you." Bring value. Think about what they're asking for versus what we think they need, and bring both, right? Anticipate what their needs are. If you have a new sales leader that's coming, okay, you can welcome them with a meet and greet. But you can also welcome them with a meet and greet and a dashboard of their new population, the ranking of their performances, their historical performance attainment, and their percent of target pay. Right. Make it so that stakeholders cannot choose paper or plastic without you.
Right.
Bring value.
Yeah. And I think I see a lot of the value also comes in from data and insights.
Yes.
Because it feels like, when you have insights and data, you automatically almost get a seat at the table.
Yes, that's a really, really good point. And then also education too, right? So I have a way of being able to educate my stakeholders in terms of the whys of the sales compensation. I often share that it's art and science, but I know that we're the SMEs, and I don't want them to feel left out. And they actually appreciate that. So bring value from an education perspective, from decision-making perspective. Be the one who's thinking about the thing that he hasn't thought about yet. Bring value, and that's how you get a seat at the table. Be proactive about that data, and that's how you get a seat at the table.
Yeah, Fantastic.
Yeah.
So maybe getting back to your career over the last 20 years, what's one belief that was long held that now you're looking back and saying maybe this is not something that I want to hold onto yet,
Yeah.
or actually think of something that's changed your mind on.
Yeah, I don't know if it was long held for me, and I see this often, but I would say the belief that that I've had to make peace with is communications. Communication is not the last step of the process. It's literally the piece that makes everything else works, right? Communication is that glue between your sales compensation programming and that customer experience, which is going to drive those behaviors for the organization. And if you think about communication, right, it's all those things considered, like in terms of it has to be accurate, it has to be honest, it has to be simple and intuitive, the timing matters. You want to anticipate the questions that are coming forth, and also really be really thoughtful about the mode. Is it email? Is it in person? Right? And so when you have that in place, and if you miss that step, if you miss that step in communications, your plans can fall flat.
Yeah. No, I can see that. And I think that's a great point, because a lot of young professionals miss out and, as you said, keep communication to the last. Have you seen communication in terms of your plans and strategy also vary depending on the level of the leadership, or whether it's individual contributors, and the level at which a particular individual is? Does it determine how you communicate?
Yes. Yeah. One of the things I try to gain an understanding of all my stakeholders and my clients and customers is how they process information. And this helps me quickly be able to know what altitude of data to bring to them, who prefers a table versus a chart, who wants a deck, who's great with a Teams message. You really have to, when I say understand how the money is being made, that also includes how the people process information, right? To get to that process of how the organization brings in revenue. So my data sets and my decks, they can vary based on the stakeholder.
Yeah, that's fantastic, context for a lot of folks who are watching, because, communication is just thought of as one single document that I need to, prepare the best way possible. And, that's it.
What I find to be one of the most valuable communications when it comes to the sales compensation process or rolling out and launching those plans, even if you don't have the plans ready, let them know when it's going to happen. Let them know what to expect, On this date, we'll have quotas. On this date, we'll have the plan document. You have to XYZ date to acknowledge those plans. And then, hey, by this date, we'll have the rest of the dates for you.
Right.
You have to err. You want to err on the side of over communications, at least with your sales leaderships and your stakeholders, and also really be thoughtful about the reps, right? We want them to have their plans, but we also don't want to be disruptive of the timing they receive their plans.
Right.
I have a thing about, I try not to release plans in Q4. I need them to finish the race strong, right? So I needed to release in Q1, but in the meantime, just dropping a few nuggets and seeds that says, we have not forgotten about you. It's coming. But keep going, Billy. Keep going.
That's fantastic. So when you walk into a new company, how do you think about plan design? How do you think about the trade-offs within the company, whether it's growth versus costs, whether it's control or simplicity? So how do you think about plan design as you enter a new company?
Yeah, great question, because, trade-offs help you with the boundaries, because there's so many places you can go when you design the plan. And so when I first walk into the company, the first thing I'm trying to figure out is, what is the trade-off specifically? I want to get aligned there. Where the trade-offs are, because it shows up in how decisions are being made. Right. So once I can get clear in terms of what that trade-off is in terms of alignment, I also want to further understand what is their North Star, and I'm very attentive and just really understanding all the tenets in terms of their goals. We get that together, we're able to move forward fairly quickly, but it can be a challenge, right? You talk about scaling versus growth. You talk about cost, and then you also talk about the speed versus precision. But we have to draw the line and stand somewhere, because it's an improbability to solve for all things through one plan. But the first question is, you tell me where that line is, and then I can help them determine. If they have a few, we can help them determine what's the appropriate trade-offs for the goals that we're trying to solve for.
Got it. And maybe, given obviously you enter a company, there's already, some plan design that might be in place, right?
Yeah.
Was there a time where you realized that, what the comp plan that was designed is actually driving the wrong behavior across sales teams? And maybe if you could share your experience on that.
Yeah, listen, when you come into an organization, I try to look for the plan, the data, and the culture. They all have to tell the same story. So you may see attrition, you may see overpayment, you may see lack of attrition. We can see volume where we're needing margin instead. There's always a story in the data. So the first thing I try to determine is, where's the data? What data exists? And what can you share with me for me to get an understanding of the historical trends? Right. And then I also want to get my hands on the actual strategy as well for the organization. And between those two things, I can quickly determine if we're telling the right story. Everything has to be in alignment. And when there isn't, there's flags. And the one thing about flags, or when the plan is not working, it's pretty consistent. It's pretty consistent. It's going to show up. So you're going to see a delta between your sales performance versus your corporate attainment, right? You're going to see where you're missing your targets for your corporate budget as well, whether it's AOP. So yeah, it's really easy to tell if you can have the data, but maybe I'm biased because I'm such a data person, but I always start with the data to understand if this plan is going to work or not.
So if you, in your mind, what would be the top 5 data points that you want to get right as you get into a new company?
Oh, that's a really, really good question. I want sales data, and the first thing I'm going to be looking at is, what is your target pay? What is the actual payout? What is that? And then I'll look at the relationship between that payout and that and the target. Right. I'm going to do the same thing when it comes to the quotas. What is your quota attainment? I want to look at the relationship between that quota attainment and the actual payout. And then I want to look at the quota attainment, which is your sales performance attainment. I then want to compare that to the corporate attainment. Right. Directionally, they should be aligned, right? And then I want to look and see, those are the primary delta points that I look for, right? I want to look at that year over year as well. And then I want to look at the leader and say, hey, what are your goals? How are you being measured for success? And then I want to look at the performance levels in the plan and compare that to the actual G&O, the goals of that sales leader. Those are the first things I want to look at. It starts with the data. And if what's also pretty useful as well is surveys and pulse. If the organization are performing them, I like to understand where the mind is of the sales rep. Right. Are they, how they feel about, is the plan intuitive? Do they feel like it's driving the right behavior, or is it counterintuitive to what the organization is sharing? But yeah, always start with the data in terms of the performance trends of the payout versus target, and the quota attainment versus the corporate attainment is where I like to start. That's
fantastic. I did want to also pick up on one of the points you mentioned. You said sales attrition or lack of it.
Yeah.
So, what do you decipher from that data point?
There's a lot going on. So when I see that no one's leaving, I'm like, oh, they must really like their plan. But is the plan working for the rep, or is it working for the organization? When you think about benchmark performances for goal attainment or even attrition, we expect somewhere about the 10% of the org to be underperforming. So two things could be happening. It could be a quota setting opportunity or lack of a performance management program that lives outside of the sales plan, right? So it's important to have a sales plan to drive those behaviors, but it's great to also have a separate element, a performance management that highlights your top performers, that coaches your middle performers, but also be able to coach your lower performers as well, your lower earners.
Fantastic. Awesome. If it's okay, then we can go into the ad hoc questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And feel free to, if there's not a great perspective that you had on.
But
something.
I'm curious, would you add anything in terms of what data you would look for when you're going in?
I think you covered pretty much the most
No
important.
one's ever asked me that question, by the way.
No,
That's a good question.
No, I really found that very interesting. And obviously you said, that's kind of your passion as well. So, I wanted to kind of dig deeper and get a little more learnings. I think outside of those, obviously coming from the revenue operations background, I would also want to understand territories. And the perspective of, if overachievement is related to having the most lucrative territories, and just that relationship is something that I want to get a perspective on. The other thing I would also look at is, from different companies, again, there could be the sales pipeline generation that's coming in from different sources. And so I'd love to understand if there's differences between teams in terms of how much they're self-sourcing vis-a-vis how much marketing or demand generation is providing them, and how that impacts them.
I would definitely look at that in terms of click down, right? And I would also look at, and I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, the cost of compensation sales, right? The C cost, right? What is percent of expenses that we're spending on commissions and bonuses? And it's even better if I can have the market data to compare it to, right? So if we're spending 12%, what is companies spending for as well for our size, right? But I spent a lot of time just digging through expenses, especially in this climate over the past 10 years. We're always seeking opportunities to optimize efficiency.
Absolutely. And in fact, I would also, I think one of the points that you mentioned early on, which is taking the revenue and then comparing the costs and basically saying, hey, for this particular large deal that came in, for every dollar that came in, how much was spent on sales compensation across multiple different teams and their leadership and
that's important. And also, if we're spending this on these deals, how do we compare to the market? How do we know if we're paying too much or too little? And so when I see low attrition and the organization is not making their numbers, that could be a flag, right? That could be either a quota setting opportunity, I would call, or there's something in the sales plan, right, that we need to revisit to try to trigger different behaviors.
Yeah, makes sense. Awesome. So maybe I wanted to double click a little bit, given that you've worked in all of these massive companies. Curious, how do you think about the timing itself, right? Like, when do you start your plan design for the next year, and what's the process that you follow to ensure that things are on board before you start new year?
I truly believe that sales compensation is a year-long cycle. We don't do it one season. I mean, you have a season where you're actively devoted to it, but all year long, you're collecting intel, right? When you're doing your quarterly readouts, when you're surveying calls from the field in terms of their inquiries, every day little nuggets are dropping on your desk in terms of the field sellers' input and feedback, performance trends, market strategy, the strategy internally, but also the economy as well, right? So you're learning something new every day, and I literally keep a log because it's a year-long cycle. I'm not waiting till Q3 to say, oh, where do we need to make some changes from? I'm thinking about it all year long. And this is not based on the size of the organization, the sector, industry. I'm thinking about it all year long.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I don't think most of the practitioners really think of it that way. So that's great that you mentioned that. And as you go through the year, do you feel like sometimes there's a need for you to make some interventions with some short-term, measures, incentive measures, or for that matter, SPIF programs? Has that something that do you factor that in right at the start, or is that something that comes up as you see what's happening in the economy?
SPIFs can be quite beneficial and valuable. It has to be very intentional and thoughtful, and it has to move with both grace and speed, right? So if you think about it, really you want to leverage SPIF to re-energize the org where you need some extra energy in performances, right? So if I'm seeing that my Q2 is not landing where I want it to be, I want to incorporate a SPIF, right? But that takes time. You have to move it pretty fast. You have to determine the gap, you have to design a plan, roll it out, and then hopefully that the deals will close in time for the Q2. So I do recommend placeholder SPIF, but I really prefer SPIFs that solve a very specific challenge real time.
And When do you announce that SPIF? Is it on the day when it becomes active, or you announce it ahead?
It depends.
You know?
It depends. It depends on the need, right? Sometimes we know at the top of Q4 is the easiest, right? Usually at the top of Q4, you know what you want to release, right? But it really depends. Sometimes it could be halfway mark of Q2 and we need to push for closure for the last 2 months or the month and a half. I say release them as needed, but be really thoughtful about it. Solve for something, and just keep in mind that, like all bonus incentives, once they become eligible, it's hard not to re-release that same type of plan in future years, right? They may see it as demotivated. They don't have this opportunity again in a future year.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And like, how do you think of the plan components with those short-term incentives? You said, should that be different from your core components? Because presumably you're already incentivizing with the core components. And
the thing is about the SPIFs, and this is why you want to be really thoughtful. You don't want to, the unintended consequence, you don't want to distract from your core plan. You don't want it to be, you want it to be probably no more than 5 to no more than 20% of their annual SIP target. Because think about it. If I can make more than 20% in 1 quarter, then I can sleep for the rest of the year. So you really want to be thoughtful in terms of the metric, because it should be solving for something that your sales plan cannot. And you want to be mindful of the amount as well. You don't want it to contradict or distract from the sales plan. But you still have to be able to influence the behavior in order to be rewarded on it, right? For it to work.
Got it. Awesome. So, Winnie, if you were to share any final thoughts to young professionals in terms of things that you would advise them on their career, or any things that you would say as takeaways from the conversation, what would that be?
I would say, whatever you do, do it well. So if you're going to go into sales compensation, learn the market, learn the organizations, study all the best of the best. Go into LinkedIn, follow the systems, the organization that creates systems that track and manages the businesses in terms of quotas and sales performances. You really just want to become an expert at whatever you do. So if you're going to pick a field, do it really great and be all in it, right? So if you're an Olympic runner, right, you're running every day, there's no down season. Similar to sales compensation, I am constantly reading white papers. I'm constantly reading proxies of other organizations. I'm interested in terms of how other organizations, whether they're comparable to mine or not, how they're performing and how they're being affected by the market. So I would say just be really, really informed about the career that you choose. Now, the great thing about sales compensation, I shared earlier that it's high stakes, but it's also high reward. It's one of the functions where you really do get exposure to cross functions. So it's a really great opportunity to build transferable skills. And I also think that regardless of the level that you're at in sales compensation, it's also high exposure to senior leadership.
Right.
It's the one place that regardless of where you are at the table, you're going to understand or have visibility in terms of how your president, your SVP, and your HR senior leadership are thinking about the organization.
Right.
So I think it's a really great place to enter an organization.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point, and I don't think a lot of people have talked about it. The part where, especially with someone who's early in their career, this is great exposure to learn so many different things of what makes people move. And I think that's going to be huge career learnings that are going to be transferable.
Because when I say know how the organization make money, it really means everything, right? The inventory process, the selling motion. Even when I'm thinking about plan design, right, I have to think about HR and legal in terms of the do's and don't. What can I do mid-year versus not? What can I offer in terms of compensation versus not? What changes can I make? Even you asked a question regarding the timing of a SPIF. That matters as well, depending on the organization. This is a really good opportunity to learn as much about almost every tenet of the org if you come in through sales comp.
Fantastic. That's great. Any resources that you recommend for continuous learning? You said you look at white papers. Any resources that you'd recommend for listeners?
You know what? what's really great is follow the consulting organizations on LinkedIn. So AGI have really great white papers. If you think about the top leading sales compensation consultancy groups, there's 8. So depending on your industry, right? So there's AGI, there's Simpson, there's ZS Associates. Am I allowed to name these people?
That's right. Yeah.
So I would follow those for their white paper. World at Work is a tremendous resource as well. I happen to be a faculty member where I teach courses, both in broad-based and sales compensation. They have great white papers that are free, but also they have learning. So there's an opportunity to get a certification in sales compensation. It's called a CP, Certified Sales Compensation Professional, but also they're probably the one org that that has certifications globally across all the compensation tenets. So if you really want to get well versed in sales compensation, World at Work is a really great resource to begin with, and read the paper. Read the paper, listen to the news. You really have to be all in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All in it is. And I think on World at Work, I think they also have a annual conference that happens.
Yes. Thank you so much for reminding me of that. Yeah, there's an annual conference, and there's 2. They have the total rewards, which is mostly broad-based and your benefits, but also every August, there's a sales compensation conference, which is amazing because there's coursework and workshops throughout the 2 to 3 day that you can learn, and you can also network other practitioners.
Absolutely.
And one of the things I really appreciate about sales compensation, that it's a specialized niche, which means it's a small world. Like, we all know each other. I always say, like, I know when a friend has left the job because my phone rings, right? A recruiter's calling. It's that small. But also that same smallness and that specialty means you have others you can reach out to to pick their brain on a certain topic. The Conference Board is another organization that's great as well in terms of sales compensation learnings.
Got it.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. And I think World at Work, the conference there, has like 300 plus sales comp practitioners in one space. So it's a great place to...
It's a great opportunity to network. And if you think about what we do in terms of sales compensation, we're typically the SME in the room, right? Here's an opportunity for you can go into a 3-day conference and people actually understand what you're talking about. You no longer feel like no one knows what I'm talking about. You're there with like peers, right? Yeah. You can learn, you can build, you can network. I absolutely love the World at Work conference.
Yeah, absolutely. And at Everstage, we've also we have the Uncappd community.
Yes.
Which is a Slack community that's there for just sales comp practitioners.
And how do you access that community?
So it's you could register for access, and you should typically within 24 hours get a
So is there a website I would go to?
Yeah, it's uncappd.com. It's UNCAPPD. Without the E. So.
Perfect. I'll be sure to check it out as well, but also share it with my team.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's just we do have sessions that happen there's AMAs that happen with practitioners. So really a place that you can continuously learn and ultimately kind of, because I think the way we think about it is, if you're going through something, there's a chance that somebody somewhere out there has gone through it.
That's right.
Awesome. Winnie, this was great. Thank you so much. This was a lot of great learnings for our listeners, and I personally enjoyed and learned a ton as well. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom.
I am thrilled and honored to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome.
All right.